Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, back with part 2 of the Mythbusters Special, Italeri U2. When we last left off, we had completed building and sanding and priming the fuselage, and now we are going to move on to the wings. So there are a few modifications that I have to make to the wings in order to help it match the photo reference that I'm going off of. And so in the kit, you put on these two large pods on either wing. And I believe the pods are meant to store various instruments and data collection devices that the U2 uses in its mission. However, the aircraft that Adam Savage flew on did not have them. So I have to remove the fairings off these wings and rebuild some of the structure there. Also, the flaps are in a lowered position in the picture. So I'm using the back side of my knife here to kind of score along the separation line there. And so I have to remove the flaps and put them in a lowered position. And then just like the fuselage, we'll have to sand everything, rescribe everything, do all that stuff. So basically that's what I'm doing here, is just making preparation to modify these things. I was a little daunted at first going into this, thinking like, I have to remove a lot of plastic and I have to rebuild a lot of plastic. But fortunately, the kind of basic geometric shape of the wing actually made it much easier than I was expecting it to. So it was just kind of a matter of getting all of this, this plastic hump removed there. So I used the knife for the majority of it, and then hit it with the jeweler's file to kind of remove the last of it. And in fact, these jeweler files really saved my bacon on this build. I used them quite a lot. Because they can be quite aggressive, and so they take off a lot of plastic when you're wanting to remove big chunks of plastic like here. So basically, I get to the point where I've removed any of that surface bump, and we can go from there. So here I'm just putting the two halves of the flaps together from the upper surface and the lower surface, and you can see there's that huge seam line running down the middle of the flap there. So just imagine trying to build this and having that big seam line there. It is on the bottom of the wing, so if you have it on your shelf or something, you're less likely to see it, but it is quite large and it's quite pronounced, and it would be kind of a pain to deal with if you weren't going to be rescribing this whole kit, and still want to save the detail on those flaps. So just a word of caution there. So now what I'm doing is I'm gluing some tabs onto the inside surface of the wing that will stick out a little bit. So in between the two flaps where this instrument pod would normally sit is just kind of a section of wing that just comes straight back out and is non-movable. So in order to rebuild that structure, I'm putting these tabs on so that I have something to glue the outside plastic to it, and you'll see what I mean a little bit later on. So here I'm just oh yeah, look at that warp there on the end of the wing. That was the other thing dealing with this kit. There's a lot of warped parts on this. The tooling comes from the mid 80s. Who knows when this plastic was actually molded? I mean, your guess is as good as mine. But yeah, so getting the wing together took a little bit of muscle and elbow grease. At this point, we're going to start sanding, and I'm going to cut out a lot of the sanding and filling in this video because I had a lot of it in the last video, and let's be honest, no one loves watching sanding and filling. But you can see I'm using a really aggressive sandpaper here to remove all the panel lines and knock it all down. I eventually come in with finer grits of sandpaper to smooth that all out. So here I'm using some rather thick plastic that matches the thickness of the actual wing to rebuild the structure in the back here. And it's just kind of a matter of cutting, test fitting until I got the what I needed, so it matches up with the flaps there. And you can actually see I've put a little strip of plastic on the front of the flaps there to help smooth those out, because it was just kind of an open gap. So also there was these kind of rectangular holes on the bottom side of the wing that the pod parts would slot into. So these are I'm just sticking a little bit of styrene plastic in there and gluing it, and then so that'll kind of plug those holes. Plug this hole, So it's just kind of a collection of bits of plastic. And but again, because the profile and shape of it's rather simple, just flat surfaces basically, it wasn't too difficult. So here I've thrown on some Tamiya putty, and we're just going to start sanding it smooth. And it took a couple of sessions of sanding putty, priming, that whole work from the first video. So, but eventually I was able to get it to a pretty decent condition. I also had to fill in this kind of a small area on the front side of the wing. Wasn't too bad. All it took was just a little bit of filler. I didn't need to put any plastic in there. So this is the bottom side. You can see where those 4 points were as well. I threw a little putty in there just to make sure. Doing a little bit of wet sanding here to kind of help smooth things out. So at this point, I've done the sanding, I've done all that stuff, and I'm going to start this process of scribing. So again, similar to how I did it on the fuselage, I'm just using my little razor saw here. You want to use light pressure when you're doing this, especially on these initial passes. If you're using heavy pressure, I find that you're more prone to slipping. And then you're just causing yourself way more work. So I just do a couple of really light passes to pull that plastic out using the tape as my guide. It's funny, I find just doing straight flat lines like this way more difficult than doing curved lines along the radius of a fuselage, for example. I don't know why. That's just that's just how it works out. So we do a couple of these. I'm not necessarily going super accurate or super detailed with panel lines, largely kind of just going off the drawings in the instructions to inform me where the panel lines are. So nothing terribly complex, but just enough to show that it's there and that they exist. Right, better than the raised panel lines in my opinion. Another shortcoming of this kit is the rather small connection points between the wing and the fuselage. The wings on this are really long, and it ends up putting a lot of strain on that connection point with such a small surface area to grab. So I ended up using some brass rods to pin all the way through from one wing into the fuselage and then into the next wing to help kind of provide it some strength and structure to keep those wings together. Mainly because what I was worried about was that I would have to fill that seam line between the wing and the fuselage, and I was worried that any little, if you bump the outside edge of the wing, push it down a little bit or whatever, it would pop that seam. So I really wanted to try and reinforce it to avoid that potential problem. Because there'd be nothing worse than going through your whole build, getting that seam all nice and cleaned up and puttied and invisible, going through the whole process of painting, and then you bump it at the very end and it pops that line. And that would just be so infuriating. So, and this is a rather large gap too, which is unfortunate. But when you look at images of the actual aircraft, this is all seamless. It's all blended together so nicely. So, I found it necessary to do this, and I think if I were to do it in the future, again, which let's be honest, I probably won't. I would actually use steel rods instead of brass. Brass just ends up being a little bit too malleable compared to a steel rod, and I think the steel rod would give a little bit more rigidity. But I'd used what I had on hand, so, and it worked for the time. And I don't plan on manhandling this around, so I'm hedging my bets here that it'll be just fine. But you can see just getting this joint in there, making sure it's all squared up and good to go. So we use a little bit of super glue as well as the plastic cement to really, fortify that bond. So at this point we can fill it with putty. And like I said, it's a pretty significant gap. So it required a lot of putty to fit in there. The bottom side was a little bit easier because it's flatter, didn't have that curved surface. But again, it's just, we got a lot of putty going in there. And I go through so I've already gone through the process of sanding it and cleaning it and priming it and everything. So we're all primed black now. We can attach to the flaps. So I've added these little tabs to the flaps so that I can get the proper alignment. And they just slot into the back of the wing there, into the opening. So pretty easy. And, again, the simplicity of this aircraft kind of lends itself to being able to do this, where there's simple, it's just a simple hinge flap. They just, hinge down at that point. So it's not like it's a complex Fowler flap or a split flap or something. So pretty straightforward there. So now we can start with the paint process. Now, obviously, the U2 is black, at least in its current form. Originally, they were natural metal. But painting black is kind of boring sometimes, and especially if what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of using a pure black, because it just ends up looking cartoonish and toy-like. Actual black painted aircraft, at least those that are in military service, this isn't going to refer to like show planes or super high gloss black air show performers, that kind of a thing. But normal military aircraft that are quote unquote black really aren't actually black. The elements really take a toll on black paint, so they fade, they weather, and if you look at images of the U2s, they almost come across as slightly brownish, at least in certain pictures. And so really what I'm going to try and do here is starting with white as my as a marble layer, create some interesting patterns and shapes that will then get, will translate through the final paint. So on the horizontal surfaces, I'm really kind of just going for kind of a patchy look, but on these vertical surfaces around the fuselage, really kind of going for a streaking look. And so that's kind of what I was going through. Now I'm just adding a little bit of earth color to this. Like I said, from the images that I saw, there was a kind of a brown hue coming off the aircraft. So I'm just adding, this is really thinned paint, by the way. So just adding touches of this brown into certain areas. I didn't hit the whole thing with it, but many areas to really kind of create some tonal variation once we actually put down the final black layer. So again, this is just going on really thin. I did not want this strong at all. I wanted it more of like a hint of brown, as opposed to like, hey, look, that's painted brown. So I was just kind of concentrating a lot of the high points of the surfaces. I didn't put a lot of brown on the underside. The underside would obviously be less sun bleached than the upper surfaces, so that's kind of why I avoided putting brown there. But it's just kind of a matter of going around and getting the color into the places that you feel are appropriate. Check your references. So now we can just kind of finalize things and get prepped for our final black color. And so yeah, quite happy with this. So for my final black, I am using Tamiya's NATO black. And again, this is also thinned down pretty well because I wanted it to be somewhat translucent so that a lot of this, pre-shading would show through. And so this is just a matter of laying down lots of thin layers until I'm happy with the look. And this is really just kind of one of those things in modeling that, I can't give you a percentage of like, oh, lay down, 5 layers and you'll get the perfect black color, faded black color. It's really kind of a thing you have to do, by eyeball, like what looks good to you as the modeler. And everybody's going to have different opinions on what looks good, right? So it's purely subjective. But ultimately, modeling is a subjective hobby. We do things that look good to us as the modeler. And unless you do commissions, or you do it professionally, and you have to build something for someone else. When you're doing it for yourself, like you just do what you want. Do what looks good, and even if it's not 100% accurate or it's not historically accurate or whatever, just as long as you're having fun with it. So. And actually, when it came to the paint process on this, I was really having fun with this. It was really fun just kind of laying down these layers, getting it to the point that I was happy with, and really kind of playing around with the idea of painting an all-black aircraft, which I'd never really done up till this point. So here we go. This is kind of my final black. So you can still see some of that white and that brown showing through, but not so much that it looks unnatural. And I'm quite pleased with it. So next up, we're going to hit it with some gloss. So we're using the Alclad Aqua Gloss. And this, because it's so big, it ended up using up a lot of my gloss. I did have to lay down a couple of layers, and in the end, I don't think I achieved quite as glossy of a layer as I was hoping. Is kind of more like satin gloss, and I think that may have played a part in some of the some future issues that I will be exploring in this video. But so we get that laid down, and get that to a point where at the time I thought I was pretty happy with it. Normally I do enjoy the aqua gloss a lot, and I think I just did not give a good enough coverage on this. So what ends up happening, so I start applying the decals. These are the kit decals. And it was interesting because some of the red, like you see the red here on this tail band that I'm putting on, that's red. That's quite pronounced. But some of the other reds were really dark and muted. And so it's interesting. I don't know if that's a result, like an issue with the printing process or how they were made. I'm not sure. But it was kind of unfortunate that some of the decals just weren't quite as bright and vibrant. Like you can see that badge between the BB and the band, just not quite as bright. So here I'm just laying down the Walther Solvaset to help these decals settle down. Get everything looking good. I didn't put all the stencil data on because I just kind of didn't like how it was looking. So I just kind of hit the main decal. So now we're actually painting the intake covers. Again, this is just based off of my reference picture, nice and red. So there we go. We can paint the wheel well. So interesting, in a lot of the reference pictures I saw of the U2 landing gear, which there aren't very many of, the interior of this main landing gear wheel well is white, but the actual landing gear strut in there is black. But the one on the back end of the aircraft, the landing gear wheel well is black and the strut is white. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I thought it was interesting that they were kind of mismatched like that. But hey, that's kind of just how it goes sometimes. So we're going to hit the whole thing with a matte varnish, and this is kind of where my problems start. So you're not going to see it very well in the video, but when we get to the pictures at the end of the video, you'll notice that most of my decals silvered really bad, and it just kind of completely took me off guard. And in fact, I was so distraught and disgruntled about it that I shelved this kit for almost 4 months. In fact, so I actually finished building the airplane last year, so in 2022, and I was just so bummed by how badly the decals silvered that I was just like, I don't want to have to deal with it. I had a base that I was going to build for it, and a figure. And, I was like, oh, it's going to be cool. Adam Savage dedication. It was like, and I felt like I totally screwed it up, totally messed up the decals. And so I shelved it. And I eventually came back and did some work on the decals to help minimize the silvering. It's still not great, but it's a lot better than it was. So what's interesting is the time jump between the end of this video and the beginning of the next video where I'm going to build the base, it literally is 4 months. And for you guys, it'll be 2 weeks, but so it's not quite so bad. But at this point, we're just kind of putting on the remaining pieces, the landing gear, the doors, the wheels, all the little pieces that finish off the aircraft. And then you'll get to see the final reveal here. So, not much to say about these parts. They fit as advertised. There's kind of this weird complex thing with the front landing gear where you have to get the doors aligned properly, and then you have to get like this weird strut thing attached to them. So that kind of took a little bit of fiddling and dry fitting to make sure I got those aligned correctly, but eventually we got it. The little wheel bogies that go on the outside of the wings. So these just there's these two little holes for it. They just pop in. And they're quite delicate, so be careful with them. And then last but not least, we put this antenna on with a little bit of stretch sprue and got it painted up, and that's going to wrap it up for us. So in just a second here, you'll see the final pictures, and you'll see what I was talking about with the silver decals. So again, at the time, really disappointed, really bummed about it. I have since fixed it, so you'll see the final version in the next video. So in the next video, we will be working on the base. So I built a nice big base for this and a custom Adam Savage figure. So I got to try my hand at some figure sculpting in 1/48 scale. So yeah, that was an adventure. I'm really happy with how the actual paint job turned out. I like the subtle variations in the tones and the colors. I'm really pleased with that. I would like to do another black aircraft sometime in the future so that I can keep experimenting with that. So anyways, if you've made it this far, I really appreciate you sticking around. And if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. And give this video a like, and leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. See you on the next one. Cheers.